Hello everyone and welcome. The transfer market hasn't officially started yet, but articles and rumors are buzzing with everywhere, notably from some journalists who a few years ago still, yeah, but bro, don't worry, I introduced you to that guy to try to get some small percentages on the deals, and now they tweet in English like Fabrizio Romano. So, in this huge jungle that would deserve a special video, we're going to focus more on the specifics of this summer transfer window because I hear everything and anything. Yet this summer, the rules have changed a little. So, they have already changed for all the teams qualified for the Club World Cup since the transfer window was opened, especially for them. And yes, as I had explained some time ago, since the revamped Club World Cup is an idea of the divine leader Gianni Infantino, FIFA is not serving football but serving the ideas of its president. No matter if it even goes against the regulations and all, so we're going to change everything to allow the club to have a special transfer window. It still decides quite a few things related to players at the end of their contracts, what's going to happen, but well, in any case, it's the Club World Cup, and above all, this Club World Cup is going to have another impact. Economically, we're putting so much money so that teams don't play the substitutes, that in fact it will give an economic boost to these terrible clubs, and all those who are not qualified, well, it's really a huge blow. And especially in some leagues, we talked about New Zealand, we can talk about African or Asian leagues, and in fact, even in Central America, it will give such an economic boost that they have a financial power that others do not. So it will inevitably disrupt the transfer windows of those countries. Second regulation point that is very important is the new rules in the Premier League now on cumulative losses. I could make a special video on how losses are calculated. There are several ways and all of that, which means it will definitely limit the transfer market of certain teams. Because that we're used to. Normally you think, okay, well, you always have an English soccer who will arrive and put 30 bricks on a player. And it's the dream of all the teams, but don't worry, we're going to please the competition from England to raise prices. And often with deals, not always clear, especially West Ham, which is potentially the most unpredictable club in recent years when it comes to transfers. Suddenly you'll have an offer of 20 million, you don't know how, 25, etc. Except that a club like West Ham today, they need to sell. So that's why the Dutch are waiting for Kudus to go to leave for Saudi Arabia. Kudus. The Knicks are waiting for that, even though considering the new agent of Kudus who introduces himself to everyone on WhatsApp saying, hello, I'm Mohamed Kudus agent. And he sends a picture of himself. I'm not convinced that helps the person's credibility, but still, be it. So West Ham, Fulham, let's say they are a bit of a dead end in the Premier League today. They're a bit boudart. Aston Villa, since Champions League qualification slipped away from the villains, also needs to comply with the new rules. That's why last summer they were in a very precarious situation because their wage bill was already far too high and they let go of Douglas Luiz as best as they could to Juventus in exchange for two players. The famous player swaps for accounting purposes. So Juve was doing the same thing. By the way, Douglas Luiz is on his way out. He has returned to England. It's been 6 months that Juve already does not want more of him. But Villa will have to make other moves. So potentially Emiliano Martinez, whom they have wanted to part with for some time due to salary, for many reasons. But it will also limit the villains' movements. Same for other teams. Newcastle qualified for the Champions League, for sure, but will not go overboard. Chelsea is also obligated to sell certain players because they cannot continue like this. So really the Premier League will still be a dominant championship, but will have fewer unusual operations to save some financially struggling teams. Let's talk, for example, about Manchester United. You may have seen that the Brazilian striker from Wolverhampton, Cunha, they want to trigger the clause that is about 70 million euros, if I'm not mistaken, paid over 2 or 3 years. We had explained the economic difficulties of United. Obviously, it's a happy coincidence that we have Kia Jorabchian around this player. Kia Jorabchian, who is obviously the agent of Zirkzee. You remember this player, I believe, from Bologna. If I'm not, no mistake, where only United has accepted the commissions. One wonders, once again, it will be the result of very good scouting work. The player is very strong, there's no doubt about that. The problem is you're going to trigger the clause, so you don't even negotiate. Not. So 70 million. Except that United this year will have to balance between purchases and departures, as we explained, and it will be the case for other teams. Well, of course, Liverpool, Arsenal. Expect a great transfer window theoretically from Arsenal. From what I heard, you have other teams that work relatively well. You can think of Brentford, you can think of Brighton. I'm not too worried about them. Well, Nottingham Forest, if I'm the owner, I want to tell you anything is possible. But generally, we also have City that will buy again, knowing that there have been quite a few changes as well with Begirsneito leaving. So I still expect to see a lot of things at City. So there will always be that strong powers. Even the promoted teams in Saxon-Derlands will have some financial means because they need to strengthen. The same goes for Leeds, etc. Therefore, there will be more and more intra-England movements. We can see it already more and more. In addition, because already, for a salary logic, a player who's already in the Premier League, to take him out is complicated. However, the clubs. English need to sometimes make a small sale to start, if you will. We saw it with Brentford when they were very happy to see Tony in Saudi Arabia. Similarly, at Stoke Villa, they were delighted with Jad Douane in Saudi Arabia. They hope, like West Ham, with a gentle blow to try to say, we will let go of a big salary with a transfer unit on players between 2027 or 28 years. United, by the way, wants to part with some players also in golf to free up payroll and recover some transfer investments to balance things a bit more, because previously Premier League clubs spent much more than they sold. So with the new rules, that's going to change. And actually, instead of the Premier League quickly entering the market, we'll wait. You might say, yes, but the last 15 days are always crazy. Yes, but this time, the clubs will no longer be able to rely on fierce competition in the Premier League. Conversely, of the second economic power, let's say today, which is Germany. Why do I say that? Maybe German clubs have perhaps less strength than Atalanta, Napoli and others. Yes, however, today, a club like Augsburg, a club like Wolfsburg, if they want to put 10, 15 million on a player, they can. Stuttgart, I won't even mention. Stuttgart, they are actually interested in a lot of French players. We see it with Asino from Rennes, but not only him. We know that the Varsona of Argent, Dortmund, etc. Why? Because they can always make one or two successful sales. But in fact, we might have the management, let's say it like that, rather the healthiest in Europe is Germany. So there is logic, there is financial appeal, and there are liquidities in Germany. Except at Stuttgart, for example, the guys are scouted. They know who they are going to focus on, meaning that they are not going to go for the top players in France. It's too expensive in salary. So they will go for mid-range players. And that's why you need to understand this summer's market. Why is the Belgian market attractive, for example? More than some Ligue 1 clubs. You go to Belgium for a good player, a prospect. They tell you between 10 and 50 million. It's expensive even for transfers. Except that the player might be at 40,000, 30,000, 50,000. So you offer him a contract of 5 years. You offer him between 100,000 and 150,000. You triple or quadruple the salary. The player is happy. You go to Ligue 1. Ludovic Blas, for example, already took this example. He's a good player, we agree? To get out, it will take at least 15 blocks, so the same. Except he already has a salary over 200. So you have to increase his salary so that it makes sense. So you will set it at 300. So actually, with 40 or 50 contracts, calculate how much that costs you each year. It's several million. So you prefer to go for players with lower salaries, or actually, you know that the transfers are equivalent to avoid having both the transfer and a similar salary to pay. However, the problem for all these clubs is it's precisely about reducing salaries because the payrolls are way too high. The Germans are targeting specifically players, French prospects, guys who might be worth 10, 15, 20 million, players maybe like Kalimuendo to stick with it. And at the same time, the problem with the French market, as we've seen in Germany, there are still some liquidities. In France, that's not the case. That is to say, you have to wait for the guys to take players in order to potentially recruit afterward. While in the Premier League, you wait a bit. Germany indeed will go after a few players, but that's less likely to be the case. And above all, you have less competition to contend with. And thirdly, they know your economic difficulties, so they don't need to outbid the clubs. That's why the French clubs are in a precarious situation. Then they will say, but we have Italy. Except last year, you had the fools from AS Roma, because there it is, call a fool a fool. AS Roma, the transfer balance last year. If Giuseppe keeps his position, I say bravo to him because it's a miracle. It was what we spent recklessly. Now be careful, there was more influence at Roma. There's not just one decision maker and all that. This year, Roma cannot afford to make the waste they did last year. Atalanta, there's money. Napoli, there's money. All the clubs going to the Champions League, there's money. That's not a problem. Inter will still have to at least balance. Juventus, okay, they qualify, but have you seen Juventus's financial statements? Then Juventus, they'll do exchanges, some here and there. Expect some antics. Maybe try to bring back Tonali, who has wanted to leave Newcastle for a while. But in short, we know that they do not have the economic potential they used to have. Then you have clubs like Com, they have money, be careful. AC Milan, you think, will have to invest after this catastrophic year. Except that all the mid-table clubs, Udinese and all the others, even Fiorentina, they won't go crazy. Bologna, which is a rather well-managed club economically, won't go crazy. All these clubs, in theory, they are waiting to offload players before they can buy. And their transfer balance is always positive at that level. So you don't expect any extravagance. They will be targeting. They're still Spain, you might say. Except that in Spain, there's nothing left. Sevilla, well, there's nothing left. All these clubs that used to be able to spend on transfers, today they cannot. You might say, but Villarreal, Betis. Look, every year, Villarreal and Betis are positive, meaning they sell more than they buy. And last year, if I'm not mistaken, Betis, guys like Lo Celso and others, it's 4, 5, 6 million. There's a player over 10 million. They had 2 MLS from memory, otherwise he doesn't have more than 10 million, and it's often loans with purchase options or free agents and everything after selling some players. That's why at one point Fekir got kicked out, legend or not, because we needed to save on salary. Because, well, if we wanted to buy everything back, the economy of Spanish clubs is complicated. Villarreal, it's the same. Villarreal, last year they sold Solot along with other players. So they were able to have several over 10 million, including a player from Toulouse. They also made a mark, okay. Except that in fact, they are positive. Real Sociedad, same thing. At the time, they had Sol Isak. We remember other players and everything. They always know what to do. But these are clubs that can offer 10, 15. Except that if they spend on the transfer, they may not be able to offer much on the salary. Economically, we obviously have very, very strong teams. We can think of Atletico Madrid, Real this year, which is likely to have a good transfer window. But same thing. They will sell themselves for a minimum. And above all, they will only target a few profiles. But the average Spanish club today, he cannot. Whereas before, as I say, you had Seville, you had Valencia, you had Celta, you had guys who were able to put in some money to have liquidity. Today, The liquidity is harder to come by. So actually, all those clubs, they turn around.
They say, tell me, in Saudi Arabia, don't you want to buy some of our players, especially to free up salaries? So in
Saudi Arabia, expect Al Qadisiyah, the club owned by Aramco, the oil company, to continue its investments, and especially Neom, which will rise to the first division. 2 successive promotions. They had taken Ben Rahma, and by the way, Olympique Lyonnais was very happy to have gotten rid of him last winter. They are going to put and the top teams at Al Hilal, considering this completely disappointing season in terms of trophies, Al Nassr, at Al Ittihad, or even at Lali, will always recruit a few players. The others, then yes, there will be some changes, but it's such a mess that is with the agents. For example, before there was a big agent, well, a well-known intermediary, Egyptian, we used to say Adam, I thought he called himself, who was from Nice. More complicated for him, there are quite a few guys, the Saudi market is a bit more complicated, certain things happen. So now you have people trying to gain quite a bit of influence, notably Karim Benzema's brother. So actually it's always the problem of how you get there and everything. Saudi profiles are increasingly younger. And for all the other clubs also, where we remember there are debts, there are salary delays. Be careful, Saudi Arabia is not the Eldorado for many. Be careful, they might make transfers of 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million. Not more. That is to say, you'll have the top players, yes, but you won't be able to offload all your players in Arabia. You might say, but there's still the MLS. The MLS is also a way out for salaries. The MLS will not pay and the transfer and salary. Except for clubs, it's urgent. We need liquidity for structural challenges and all. That's why a Swiss championship, Alpha Belgian League, it becomes a bit more attractive because player salaries are lower. So the risk is smaller and you think it makes sense. I'll pick up a player there, I'll make a transfer, a young one. But if he's good, I don't pay him that much. And later on, he can grow. Because if I already take a guy with a high salary and I give him an even higher salary, it's more complicated. That's why we've also seen the emergence of the Nordic market in recent years. Denmark, Sweden, Norway. You may have noticed that now the players coming from these leagues, the price has almost become prohibitive. So now, there are other markets. And I will specifically talk about the players, let's say, from the second tier.
Previously in League 2, there were very good salaries. You could reach 20,000, sometimes more, 30, 40, but you had at least 10, 15,000.
There, it's complicated. Today there will be 10,000 in the mid-table clubs of Ligue 2 in France. You take your 10,000, you are very happy to have it. Except some have not yet understood this. Some will end up on the sidelines. That's why today we listen to Bulgaria. Romania again has always been a friend in competition. But Bulgaria, historically, is a rather weak league. Except that in Bulgaria you can take 10 to 15,000. You have clubs that do that. And you think, well, actually, why not? Before, you didn't even listen to me. Zion today, you can find me something in Turkey, in Greece, in Cyprus. Before, yeah, well, go see, because, I was a legend. It's true that sometimes you have bad payers and all. Except in salary, we know it can pay. Now, all the guys, okay, I'm interested. So in fact, we see that there's a new market at that level. Bulgaria has awakened, even a little bit the Baltic countries. You have guys going to the Baltic countries. Before, it was unimaginable for a guy from the national team, lower table League 2, to end up in Estonia, mainly in Lithuania, or even in Latvia. One could not imagine that. Maybe a little in Azerbaijan. Today, we consider all these markets. So it clearly shows the new economic realities of a transfer market that will obviously be made, etc. We will see the exchanges and everything, where there is still a bit less madness, a little more interior of perspective, but unfortunately that's where we see that agencies are still as influential. I will finish with a little anecdote from the uncle, the master. Yes, the master, Pini Zahavi, obviously for those who are interested, but I still wonder by what miracle Barca is interested in Marcus Rashford. Tells me that Pini Zahavi is now managing the interests. It's a bit like Manchester United with Cunha. Sometimes there are sporting reasons, and then before anything else, before the sporting aspect, there's always one thing, which is business. And this summer, I can tell you, whether at a low level or even higher, there will be some, especially to bypass the rules and keep buying even if we're in debt. That's the magic of football. Quai défeuillé.